Welcome back to Second Breakfast for part 2 of our discussion of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. The previous one was our little theory that Chris Hemsworth completely stole the movie. This one is a bit broader and more open. So we've seen the movie twice already because we're freaks. The first one, Alamo Drafthouse, the day before it opened. Second time was at IMAX a couple days later after we had a little time to chew on it.
We also intentionally saw it. We bought tickets for both shows ahead of time.
Oh, this was a plan.
It wasn't we saw it, let's see it again. It was, we're going to see it twice. We just knew. So
no
we just
coincidences.
Yeah.
So the theme here is what changed on a second viewing, because I think we both had very different experiences the second time. And
definitely,
as a larger trend, I think we both got a lot out of it and much more out of it after a second viewing.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
I can open it straight up to you here because I think you went on more of a journey with it than I did. What changed for you seeing Furiosa a second time?
Sure. Well, yeah. We saw it in a regular theater for the first time, and then we saw it in IMAX 2 days later. I think we had wanted to see it in IMAX first, but the way that tickets were released, it didn't work out that way. But I think most importantly, on that day in between, we watched the original Mad Max movie at home, which we had never seen. The only other Mad Max movie we had seen was Fury Road, which changed our lives. See our last episode about Furiosa to hear a little bit more about that. So going into the first viewing, my only Mad Max point of reference was Fury Road. And I did know that Fury Road was different than the original movies that came out in the decades previous. But still, I was... based on the trailer that I had seen, the visual language and style of Furiosa looked really similar to Fury Road. So I was totally anticipating a movie a lot like Fury Road, which is why I went in worried because Fury Road was so good. And so I was nervous that Furiosa was not going to be as good. I was like, how could it be? And then we saw it and it wasn't as good. Mostly because it was very different. And I just didn't anticipate that. It's a lot more slower paced. There are a lot more slowed down moments. The music is not as in your face. Fury Road is such an adrenaline
thrill ride.
It's a thrill ride. Yeah. It's just full of adrenaline is what I'm trying to say. And it's there's no breathing room and you are just on edge the entire movie in the best way. And Furiosa was not like that. And I was I left the movie feeling disappointed by that. I also just was a little confused by how they were connecting the two movies at the end. It felt a little bit forced to me. I remember I did love Chris Hemsworth, and we talked about that. And I thought Anya Taylor-Joy was great, and there were moments in the movie that I liked. But otherwise, I was pretty disappointed leaving the movie. I just felt like I wasn't clicking with what the movie was supposed to be. And because even at the end, I said to Cam on our way out, I felt like at the very end they were gearing up for the climax of the movie, and then the movie ended, and I realized the climax of that story is Fury Road, and that was quite disappointing to me. And so then the next day we watched the original Mad Max, which is very, very different from
1979.
Yeah, Mel Gibson. And I don't like that movie, but watching it helped me understand Furiosa a lot more because that movie is also a lot more slow paced. It is really about the origins of a character, Max, their inciting incident, how they become who they become in the later films or in the later timeline of the films. And it's also just it's got some weird, not stilted dialogue, but just awkward dialogue things happening.
Can I tag a couple more echoes onto
Please,
this? Because I think we were just popcorning these out at the TV while we were watching the movie.
Yeah.
Which we would never do in a theater because we respect the theatrical experience.
But in the privacy of our home, we can do that.
But yeah, I think Furiosa is more similar to Mad Max than it is to Fury Road. But there were little scraps of dialogue that were reused. There's someone's trying to get directions for where someone has fled in the first movie, and they say, north, maybe. And in Furiosa, they say that way, maybe. It's an interesting beat to hit twice. I think it feels like a bit of a clue or a callback. You also have a climax where someone loses a limb. Furiosa, spoiler, has the arm ripped off.
Right.
And Max gets shot through the knee, which basically knocks out one of his legs. They also have the crescendo of losing family members. They both sort of accidentally run into the bad guy the first time. And both movies have prominent gloriously flamboyant male leads wearing leather pants.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. So
Please continue.
So then we watched that and I was like, okay, I think I might understand Furiosa a bit better. And so then the next night we went to see it again, this time in IMAX, which number one, seeing a movie like this in IMAX is so much fun. Like IMAX is always going to be fun. Like it's the giant screen, it's the amazing sound system. Like just that alone elevated the experience a little bit. But I think more importantly, what had happened in those intervening days was my expectations shifted. Not that I decreased the amount of quality that I was expecting. I was just, it was more just like, what kind of movie is this? And I think that helped a lot. So then going in, I was like, okay, well, I know it's slower paced. I know it's not meant to be huge adrenaline rush for 2 solid hours. It's meant to be more sweeping in scope, and it's there's some character stuff, and it's and I like how you identified it in our last episode about this. It's a companion piece to Fury Road rather than a direct prequel or a direct continuation of, in terms of style, of Fury Road. And so that helped a lot. And so then the second time, I just felt like I understood it more. I understood the overall arc of the story. I understood Furiosa's motivations a little bit more. I understood the connection to Fury Road. I still think at the end they're making some leaps to connect it to Fury Road. I think I needed more time to see how she gets from her final confrontation with Dementis to the beginning of Fury Road. I feel like I needed a bit more there, but the movie's already so long that it's fine. But I enjoyed it way more the second time. I understood character motivations better. I understood interactions better. I understood just what the plot was and where it was going and what we were doing. I just felt a lot more grounded and oriented than I did on the first viewing.
You also mentioned that you wish there had been a little more static between Furiosa and Immortan Joe to build up to what feels like a massive rivalry in Fury Road.
Yes, right. Because I haven't seen Fury Road in a few years, but I don't remember there being much build up between them in that movie other than he's this obvious villain who's doing this terrible thing, especially to these women that she's trying to save. But she says remember me to him. And maybe I need to rewatch Fury Road, but I can't remember what personal connection she has with Immortan Joe in that movie. And then I didn't really see that come alive in this movie either. We see her be kind of one of the wives for a brief minute when she's very, very young, but we don't really have direct evidence or examples of any interaction she had with Immortan Joe at that time.
Or even the other wives.
Right. Yeah. And then later on when in this movie, when she's working as this, I don't want to say a mechanic, but she's working for Immortan Joe. We see that she's got a connection with him there, but I don't see much of a buildup of antagonism between the two. And so that's what I'm really missing. That's, I think, the one final piece that is not clicking for me. But otherwise, the movie was way better the second time for me. I understood it a lot better.
And that's not a universal thing. And I don't think that's you. I'm so glad you remembered that, because that's almost exactly what you said after the theater experience. And I thought that was so eloquent at the time. I'm glad you could reenact that. I don't think I'm so good at that. But I think all of those are totally fair. And I agree with you. And I don't think that's you lowering your standards. I think sometimes when there's a movie you go in and you want to love and it's not great, I think you can kind of convince yourself that it's better than it is and sort of defend it and make peace with it. I think I do that with albums a lot.
You definitely
When I
do.
have artists I've loved for years, I think I talk myself into new albums very often.
Well, and you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're trying to be understanding, and because you care about them, yeah.
But I think I've reached this different perspective lately, and some of this is during comics. When we really got into comics the last few years, I found myself gravitating towards the creators more than the characters. And I started following writers and artists more than I would follow just a character, regardless of the creative team they threw on it. For example, the big writer that really captured my imagination when we got back into comics was Donny Cates. He was on Venom, which I like Venom. That's probably why I tried that out. But then when Venom ended and he moved over to Thor, I know nothing about Thor. I don't care about... I mean, everyone knows about Thor.
Sure.
But I hadn't seen those movies. The character, I haven't read the comics. It doesn't mean that much to me. I followed Donny Cates to Thor, and that's why I liked Thor. And then he moved to Hulk, and I started reading Hulk. And the same way, I was going into this movie excited for a new George Miller movie.
I was going to say, that's the transition you've made in all entertainment,
Yes.
is you keep following creative teams rather than certain stories. Like, if
Yes.
like any movie that Robert Eggers puts out, you're going to see.
Day one.
Not because you're necessarily interested in the content. It so happens that you are, because his interests align with ours. But if he, I mean, the same way Ari Aster, like, we would never have seen Beau is Afraid, I don't think, if Ari Aster hadn't been behind it, right? So I think that's part of it too.
I love Beau is Afraid so much.
Yeah.
So I think I had the similar sort of mixed reaction after seeing it the first time, because in my head, of course, it wasn't going to be Fury Road, but then you see it and surprise, surprise, it's not Fury Road.
Not at all.
And I think when I stepped out of the theater, I was a little thrown. I was adjusting to what it was. Obviously, Chris Hemsworth is great. But
Right.
thinking back on those 5 chapters, and I went in knowing it was 5 chapters, I was thinking about chapter 3, which has that big war rig sequence. That was stunning, incredible.
Where the guys are flying, basically, with their parachute
Yeah.
things. Yeah, that sequence is great.
And the ending was great. So I was thinking, all right, 3 and 5 were great. I know I'm going to see it again in 2 days. I'm not really looking forward to the rest of it. In the intervening time, I was really appreciating all the movies I've seen in the last 9 years since Fury Road came out and sort of kicked my ass and revolutionized the way I think about movies, action movies, the act of reckless, total abandon creativity. And I was so taken with how glorious the costuming was. How I could look at one of the cars, one of the weapons in this movie for a week. And it's such a buffet of that.
Yeah.
The visuals are just on another level. So I sort of talked myself into, well, okay, that was amazing, so that'll make it fun a second time. When I watched the movie a second time, I got so much more out of it. It felt like a different film. I think the pacing completely evened out for me.
Yeah.
Where now, when I look back on each of these 5 chapters, I think they're all standouts. I think they all have their killer action, their interesting characterization, their glorious gonzo visuals. I think they're all standouts. I think the movie is much more consistent and rock solid after a second viewing. I appreciated Anya Taylor-Joy's subtlety more.
Yeah.
I appreciated the quiet acting that she's doing. It's almost nonverbal. That's a point of the character. That Furiosa doesn't talk that much. I appreciated the similarities, the olive branches to Charlize Theron's performance. I noticed a lot more of those. Chris Hemsworth, I noticed how much he talks.
Yeah, he
And
talks a lot.
That is just as interesting and engaging a second time.
Right.
I think you can burn out on characters who talk a lot in movies.
I think you notice that difference between him and Furiosa, because she barely talks. And so that distinction is more prevalent in the second viewing.
We've talked about this a lot in movies we've seen on purpose twice, because I think the first time you're trying to get the plot, you're just, oh, I like this actor. Are they doing a good job? I'm trying to follow the plot. We talked about this when we saw Oppenheimer 3 times. The first time you're just like strapped in trying to follow what's going on.
I think we saw it 4 times, actually.
Okay. The second time, I think you notice things like the music more.
Yes.
The third time, you notice how every single second is perfect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth time, you notice everything. It really cracked
the
open
whole
for
package.
me. Same thing happened with Saltburn. The second time, I realized how bulletproof that movie was for me.
Yeah.
This time, on the second viewing, that Chris Hemsworth stuff only got better. And I noticed all of those Mad Max connections. I agree. I think it was the right decision to watch that first movie in between. But there are a couple other things that I noticed that are more our usual fare, what you and I like to talk about with echoes and callbacks and structural things that we like to play with. So I have a couple of those if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first one is these resonant, multiple, heroic sacrifices. Because there's a lot of moments here where there are 2 characters together and one of them stays behind to save the other one. Spoilers, I guess. The first one is Furiosa's mom stays behind while Furiosa escapes at the very beginning. And Furiosa can't take that and goes back to try to save her mom. And that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
Later in the film, Praetorian Jack, who's the driver, he stays behind while Furiosa escapes.
Right.
And
then she goes back.
Right, and she goes back for him. And in the same way as the mom is sniping everyone who comes, who's going after Furiosa, she snipes all of them. Praetorian Jack drives the war rig into the oncoming traffic to try to take on the people, to have fewer people following Furiosa. They're incredibly similar sacrifices. But I think the interesting thing is, after you catch the similarities, it's that immediate deviation. because by the time the second one happens, Furiosa's gone through so much. She's matured so much, obviously, trial by fire, the way her whole life is, that I think she's aging into her mother's more protective role. Her going back for her mom at the beginning is just, you're scared and don't want to be alone, and your mom will protect you.
Right, yeah.
Her at the end, when she's going back for Praetorian Jack, it's something very different. She's capable, and she can kind of protect him.
I mean, she literally saves his life.
Exactly.
He would have died without her, so yeah.
And I think the movie sort of coronates that interpretation by almost knighting her to the same heroic status that her mother occupies. When her mother steals that awesome bone armor and she's on the bike, she grabs Furiosa and they ride off from Dementus's camp. The gas tank is shot by a sniper and her armor is on fire. Rips off the armor as they're escaping, and you see the mother's back is burned up by fire.
Yeah, it's rough.
When Furiosa is going back to save Praetorian Jack, she's making that heroic sacrifice. She gets hit with the flamethrower, and she's framed with her back against a metal gate.
Yes,
as
the fire's around
flamethrower
her.
Is blasting her.
It's one of the best shots in the movie.
And
it's so cool.
It doesn't have to be that on the nose or explicit where we see that her back is burned.
Right.
I imagine it's warm.
I imagine it hurts.
But
yeah.
the iconography is explicit.
Yeah.
That I think that's the same thing. I think that's
like
that same sort of honorific knighthood being given to those characters.
Sure. Well, even then in the ongoing chase, that's when she screws up her arm. Like, that's when her arm gets all chopped up. And so, but then you see, just like the mom, she kind of is acting like it hasn't happened because she's got to keep going.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes. The thing that I caught there is that both of these heroic sacrifice sequences end with the protectors being killed horribly.
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing I want to give kudos to in this movie. Most genre fiction popcorn, it's pretty to look at, it's colorful movies, everyone has plot armor a mile thick.
Right.
The fact that Furiosa's mom and Praetorian Jack both get some of the most horrible deaths I can think of in recent years for a mainstream tentpole movie. The Furiosa's mom gets strung up and Praetorian Jack gets dragged.
Yeah.
And I think you see both of those protector figures. It's a bit more revolving door where Furiosa protects Jack, Jack protects Furiosa. But the fact that both of these protector figures get killed so horribly contribute to Furiosa's incredible character development over the course of the film.
Yeah.
And I think they sort of consecrate the shift from Anya Taylor-Joy to Charlize Theron because she's so much more hardened. It's not just that she's quiet. Anya Taylor-Joy is fairly quiet during this performance. By contrast, Charlize Theron talks more, but I think she's way more hardened. And I love the overall beautiful, quiet arc to that coldness through this movie.
I do like that.
The other thing we have to talk about is the arm. And I think there are some pre-echoes to the moment where she finally loses the arm. We know she has to lose the arm going in because we've seen the prosthetic on Charlize Theron in Fury Road.
Yes.
And what I caught here was the moment where she should have lost the arm early in the movie, because I'm going in looking for arm stuff the entire time.
Sure, because you're primed. Yeah.
That's going to be the linchpin. That's going to be the big moment. And it was better than I was expecting.
Of course.
But there's an extended sequence on that first Chapter 3 ride with the war rig where she has to fill in. The first engineer guy, the lead engineer, dies. He goes underneath the thing and flies off.
It's rough.
And she gets that little roadside promotion to being the new main engineer. There's an extended sequence of her. She's hanging under the war rig. She's close enough where she can still hear Jack call for whatever he needs done. And she's close enough to the engines where she can still do that work. What that means is, this is one of the first times we really see Anya Taylor-Joy for an extended sequence in a static shot. It's her hanging underneath the war rig 1 inch away from a spinning wheel that would destroy anything that touched it.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And that's the moment where she proves herself in a vehicle as the new engineer. When she comes through, she replaces that weird little doohickey, and then the second engine kicks in and they escape whatever the trouble is. Later in the movie, when she loses the arm, it's when she's failing sort of an engineering task, car-related, where she's trying to outrun Dementus.
Yes.
And he's in that monster truck thing. I thought that was interesting that when she succeeds, she doesn't lose the arm next to the big tire. When she fails at the end, she does lose the arm to the big tire.
Because it's still the tire. Yeah, exactly. Right. I did notice that the tire echo there.
Yeah, the other arm thing, I think it's sort of catnip for someone like me, but the fact that the map to the green place is on the arm she loses.
Yeah, sure, of
that's
course.
just so good.
It's perfect.
It just clicks into place. It makes your brain happy. It's just good
Yeah,
storytelling.
she loses this part of her. Yeah.
The other one that I caught the first time, but I just reveled in on the second viewing, was that right after she loses the arm, she's given a car with 3 wheels.
Yeah.
Come on, man. It's just
I do
good.
love that. Yeah.
It's just good symbolism.
Yes.
It works real nice.
And of course, there is a severed arm in the original Mad Max, that's tied to one of the cars that they're trying to escape on. So you've got those kind of callbacks in there too.
Yeah, and even calling back to that, you have the dog with the foot.
Yeah.
When they get to the, I don't remember if it's the bullet. I think it's the bullet farm.
Yeah.
When they get there, and then you have the surprise attack of all the guys hiding. Yeah, it's just. I got so much more out of watching this a second time and watching the first Mad Max.
I definitely like the whole sequence where she and Praetorian Jack are trying to sneak into, I think it's the bullet farm, and they're like doing this thing where they're going to pretend to, basically it's their plot to escape. There's so much conversation between the two of them just in looks that I don't think I fully picked up on in the first viewing. And I feel like I fully understood the conversation they were happening without any words being spoken. And that was really amazing to watch.
And you see the way things are introduced that will pay off later. I think you see some of the quiet brilliance of the script with the thing with the Bobby knockers and the war rig, and the fact that the guys who try to attack the war rig with those like propellers behind them, they are the gang of the guy with the black horns who was serving underneath Dementis until Dementis was trying to sneak into Gastown, and they were having the guys pretend to be war boys.
Killed his own guys.
And they shot some of the war boys, and the guy screamed, "You're scum, Dementis." And then you hear just in a little like quiet aside, as in a scene transition, that those guys broke off from Dementis.
Yes.
And then of course you see them later. You catch those things on a second viewing.
Yeah. Again, a lot of those little plot things that you're like, oh, like when they're building the war rig, I hadn't realized that like, oh, like Anya Taylor-Joy, Furiosa, is getting to build the war rig.
Right.
Like, and that's the one I believe that's in Fury Road. Like you just understand all of that a little bit better.
And you see more of it. You see that weird etched mural in the side of it on that gas tank.
Oh, it looks so cool.
I just thought it was a much more complete work on a second viewing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I recognize that the vest that Dementis is wearing, like in the second half of the movie, was taken from the jacket of the guy that he killed at Gastown when he took over, the guy who was painting on the wall, who had like the weird beard. So yeah, I liked all of that.
Yeah, I think it's also that we're meeting the movie where it is on the second time, because you know the overall shape of it.
Yeah.
And I think it makes me even more grateful that they didn't spend 9 years and then just make another Fury Road. I think I appreciated the boldness and the differences between this and Fury Road, between this and Mad Max. Yeah, I would recommend seeing the movie. I would especially recommend seeing it twice.
Yeah, lots of movies are better on their second viewing, like because you pick up on more things, but plenty of movies aren't. Some of them you like really start to see the plot holes and the things that are falling apart for it. And you're like, oh, this is actually not good at all. So it's great when a movie can be better and better the more times you see it.
There are a lot of movies that we don't talk about on the show that are agony on the first viewing.
And you don't want to bother the second time. Yeah. So, let us know what you thought of Furiosa.
Totally.
Have you seen, how many times have you seen it? Have you seen it in IMAX? Like how has that changed for you? Have you seen the original IMAX or Mad Max movies? Like how has that influenced your viewing of this one, of Fury Road, etc.? Just let us know your thoughts. We love to hear them. This movie was challenging for us in some ways, but
rewarding too.
Also very rewarding. Yeah. And I'm really glad we saw it that second time. And I also just more than anything want to rewatch Fury Road now.
Me too. So, I think that's on the docket for tonight.
Maybe we'll do that tonight.
So that was part 2 of our Furiosa Mad Max Saga discussion. Thank you for joining us. If you want even more episodes from us, we do Game of Thrones chapter by chapter discussions every Friday. We do curveballs like this every Tuesday and sometimes Wednesday.
Sometimes, yeah.
And on Sundays, we do our bonus episodes. You get at least one a month. We've been doing one a week lately. In the lead up to House of the Dragon Season 2, we've been reading the relevant chapters from the source material Fire and Blood and doing our traditional deep dive literary discussion into those. Thank you very much for joining
Patreon.
us. Check out the Patreon. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you very soon with a brand new episode.
Bye.